Merry Christmas, and thanks for joining me for this special episode of Lights Out, Your Virtual Campfire. I'm your hostess with the mostest ghosties, Sylvia Schultz. I recently got a comment on one of the episodes of Lights Out, the one where I visited Queen of Heaven Cemetery. A viewer named BG wrote to me, "You have a nice reading voice. You read a story like my third grade teacher, very nice and calm. Can you read The Night Before Christmas for us?" And I responded and told BG that I would see what I could do. Interestingly enough, we don't know exactly who wrote the poem A Visit from St. Nicholas. It's attributed to Clement Clarke Moore, but it was first printed in the New York paper The Troy Sentinel in 1823, and it had been sent to the editors anonymously. They printed it with the disclaimer, "We know not to whom we are indebted for the following description of that unwearied patron of children, Santa Claus, but from whomsoever it may have come, we give thanks for it." In 1844, 21 years after it was first published, the poem was attributed to a Bible college professor named Clement Clarke Moore. Some people said, though, that Moore was not the author, that he had cribbed the poem from the true author, Henry Livingston, Jr. But before this claim could be verified, the possible manuscript was destroyed in a fire, so we will never know exactly who wrote that wonderful poem that we love so much. And the idea of Santa Claus coming and going via the chimney is the invention of another author, better known for his contribution to Halloween. Washington Irving wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and gave the world the terrifying image of the Headless Horseman. But in an 1812 short story called Knickerbocker's History of New York, Irving tells of Santa rattling down the chimney to bring his yearly presents to children. So that's where that part of the poem came from. The reason behind the poem A Visit from St. Nicholas is just as interesting. The history of Christmas celebrations is a long, strange road. Here's an excerpt from my book, The Spirits of Christmas, that tells you all about this strange history. Christmas hasn't always been Tiny Tim saying, "God bless us, everyone." Centuries ago, it was more a matter of every man for himself. It was a time of carousing, of turning the social order of things upside down. It was, in short, a time for shenanigans. Even in modern days, we still cling to a cozy Victorian ideal of the holidays. Say Christmas, and most of us will reflexively think of family gathered around a colorfully lit tree, a tree with presents piled underneath it. Whether or not that imaginary family will get along with each other without the lubricating effects of copious amounts of rum-spiced eggnog is another matter. But before the Victorians came along and settled things down, Christmas was not the quiet domestic holiday of Dickens' one-horse sleigh rides and Currier and Ives prints. Instead, it was a holiday of boisterous revelry, sort of a mash-up of Halloween, New Year's Eve, and Mardi Gras. The Romans started the custom of giving gifts at the solstice celebration. Winter solstice, the shortest day and longest night of the year, comes from the Latin for "the sun stands still." Saturnalia and Calenday were both well-loved Roman holidays. At Saturnalia, slaves were allowed the run of the house, and masters were obliged to serve them. And Calenday marked new beginnings. The 4th century writer Libanius had this to say about the celebrations. The feast of the Calenday is honored as far as the Roman Empire stretches. Everywhere is singing and feasting. The rich enjoy luxury, but the poor also set better food than usual upon their tables. The desire to spend money grips everybody. People are not merely bountiful to themselves, but to their fellow humans. A stream of presents pours itself out on all sides. The calendar bring all work to a halt and allow humans to surrender themselves to pure pleasure. Saturnalia was just one of the many holidays that made up the Roman calendar, but it was one of the biggest. The lower classes looked forward to the role reversal that came at the turning of the year. Household slaves especially jumped at the chance to be in charge for a while, to be served by their master and mistress. Even after the fall of the Roman Empire, this role reversal at Christmas time continued to be one of the few perks enjoyed by the lower classes. The custom of wassailing, or going door to door to beg for alms, began way back in the early Middle Ages. The practice continued all through the Middle Ages as a way to keep the social and political order stable. You think giving the girl who cuts your hair an extra tip at Christmas is a new thing? Think again. In medieval times, tradesmen would ask their customers for gifts or largesse at the holidays, and sometimes they would threaten retribution if refused. A morning newspaper chucked under a hedge instead of being delivered to your welcome mat is one thing. To have someone responsible for guarding your house slack off, or actively invite thugs to ransack your home while they stand by watching, is something else entirely. This was a problem as far back as 1419 England, when the Corporation of London ordered the servants of city officers to stop the custom of asking for Christmas offerings from victualling trades, sometimes with menaces if refused. So the lower classes were discouraged from wassailing. That didn't stop them. Even the practice of caroling was frowned upon by the upper classes, both in England and later in America. Through colonial times up into the early 19th century, caroling was not the innocent, light-hearted practice we think of today. Carolers of yesteryear were not content to stand outside in the cold and sing in the faint hope of getting a mug of hot chocolate and a cookie or three. Quite the opposite, in fact. Old-time carolers were a rowdy, often destructive bunch. Consider the lyrics to "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." Now bring us a figgy pudding, and bring it right here. We won't go until we get some, so bring it right here. We sing these lyrics without a second thought, but when that song was written, the singers were a lot more aggressive in their demands. They weren't kidding about it. Imagine that you are someone fairly high up on the social ladder, either in England or in one of the big American cities, Philadelphia, Boston, someplace like that. You're relaxing with your family on Christmas Eve. You'll wait until New Year's to exchange gifts, because that's a great way to acknowledge fresh beginnings. For now, you're content to enjoy some quiet time with your loved ones. But you keep one ear cocked for trouble. And there it is, a pounding on the door. The maid hurries to open it, fearing it will break under the fists of the drunken hooligans. Your house clearly isn't their first stop of the evening. A half-dozen thugs swagger into your front parlor, their boots tracking snow and mud onto your carpet. One of them, clearly the leader, calls himself the Lord of Misrule. He yells at you to bring out several bottles of your best wine, and plenty of good food, cake if you have it, and he knows you do. The rowdies spend an hour or so swigging claret and mashing cake crumbs into the doilies. But what can you do? You can't tell them to leave. It's tradition. They finally do leave, and you breathe a sigh of relief. You're out a couple of bucks, since they demanded money too, and your parlor is trashed, but they're gone. That's over with. Until the next month shows up. It's going to be a long holiday season. It's not too much of a stretch to say that Clement Seymour, with his poem A Visit from St. Nicholas, single-handedly turned society's perception of Christmas 180 degrees. With this poem, better known by its first line, "'Twas the night before Christmas," Moore completely upended the perception of Christmas as a time of riotous misrule. Instead, he introduced the character of St. Nicholas as the polar opposite of a Lord of Misrule. Instead of a bunch of rowdy young men busting into the house uninvited, one man, solo, comes into the house. He hasn't been invited in either, but he comes in silently, without the boisterous good cheer of the wassailers, a good cheer that could turn ugly in a moment. St. Nicholas is obviously a member of a lower, working-men class. He holds the stump of a pipe clenched in his teeth, which was an affectation of the laboring class. Dandies smoked pipes with long stems. Working men preferred to snap their pipe stems off short. Also, he opens up a peddler's pack. But he poses no threat to the household. As a matter of fact, St. Nicholas displays his own largesse. Instead of demanding gifts from the narrator, fine food and liquor, presents of money, St. Nicholas leaves gifts for the household. And most importantly, instead of threatening the narrator, "We won't go until we get some," St. Nicholas expressly lets the narrator know he has nothing to fear. His appearance and behavior, although startling, are absolutely non-threatening. At about the same time Clement Moore published A Visit from St. Nicholas, in 1822, society's opinion was turning against public displays of drunken rowdiness at Christmas. It was around this time that people began to buy Christmas presents for each other and for their children, rather than making them. Although, even then, a handmade gift, or at least a hand-finished gift, was much preferable to a completely store-bought Christmas. Merchants wanted to make their shops safe, appealing places, free from the unwanted attentions of drunken revelers. Instead of being reported in regular newspaper articles, accounts of rambunctious gang behavior started to show up in the police blotter section of the paper. The boorish behavior, frowned upon by genteel society, was quite literally marginalized, and it eventually faded. Wassailing had largely died out in England by the 1930s, even though the folks who used to practice the obsolete custom were still alive and well. Social programs by then were helpful enough that the poor no longer needed to beg, even at Christmas time. By the 1970s, though, groups in the east and west of England started up again, singing traditional wassailing carols and offering drinks of beer or cider from the wassail bowl. These groups do collect money in exchange for their caroling, but now the money raised is donated to charity. And now, let's revisit that cozy poem. Whether written by Clement Clarke Moore or Henry Livingston, Jr., I hope you listen to this reading with a bit of a different perspective now. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave a lustre of midday to objects below. When what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick I knew in a moment he must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry! His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke, it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." Thank you so much for being with me this Christmas Eve 2020. No matter where you are or what you're doing today, I hope you are somewhere cozy and safe. I'll see you all in 2021 when we begin the countdown to Lights Out episode 100 with the Gettysburg Experience. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good fright.